My name is Susan Himmelweit. I'm Emeritus Professor of Economics at the Open University, and I'm also the coordinator of the Policy Advisory Group of the Women's Budget Group. Welcome to my exp. Feminist economics looks at the economy from the point of view of women's lives just as much as men's lives. And it differs from mainstream economics that tends to take men's lives as the norm. And if it looks at gender differences, it looks at women as different in the ways in which they are different from men. Feminist economics sort of reverses that and says both sorts of lives are equally valid ways of looking at the economy. And in doing so, what it's saying is that gender is a structural part of economics, that gender differences are part of the way our economy runs. And therefore, in exploring any economic issue, we have to look at where gender differences arise. How might men and women react differently? How are they differently positioned in the economy? And what, for example, does that mean about economic policy? If economic policy ignores those differences, it may arrive at the wrong results, different results from what was intended, if it just thinks about, well, what would the effect on people living a typical man's life might be, if it doesn't think about what's the effect of that policy on women or people living the sort of lives that women lead. Mainstream economics would tend to see workers as starting at a certain age, perhaps quite young, having had some training, and then working till retirement, accumulating incomes and some savings during that period, and then living off those savings until they die. Women's lives tend to be much more complicated than that. First of all, a lot of the income that they receive, but they may not receive directly from their own work. They may be part of households in which somebody else's employment is in employment, and their own employment maybe they work a bit, they have a job until they're 25, they take some time off for children, then they go back part-time, then they might have to take some time off again, looking after older people, and they will end up with a much smaller pension insofar as the pension is accumulated through employment. And at various points in that life course, they will be quite dependent on the state either for benefits or for services. So a much more complicated picture than the rather simplistic one that economics tends to have, that's based very much on a typical man's life. Now, of course, it doesn't really apply to most men either, but it's an even worse characterization of a typical woman's life. Having an economics that ignores the reality of gender difference is detrimental to both men and women, because it comes up with answers that are not correct. Like, for example, policy could be very badly targeted and therefore very much more expensive if it assumes that everybody is going to react to it as their idea of a typical man. So that's one reason it's detrimental to everyone. But the other reason it's detrimental to everyone is that some of the things that women tend to care about more than men do are very important to everyone. So women, through the choices that they make, have shown that they tend to be more interested in how people are cared for than men do. If we built an economy simply around men's concerns, say for a good income, and to be able to accumulate savings, we wouldn't have much care going on in the economy. Even if men would ignore that, would in practice impact on them just as much as on women. Everybody needs to be cared for at various points in their lives. It's just that women tend to be more conscious of that, and feminist economics is more conscious of that than mainstream economics. One example of a badly targeted policy is pensions policy. So many countries, particularly in Western Europe, are now moving away from a system in which the state provides for older people, for people after retirement, but expects people to make their own savings. Now, if you're employed full-time all your life, you've got the opportunity to make sufficient savings to keep yourself in old age. If you're only employed sporadically because you take time out to care for other people, you may not have the chance to build up good savings. And throughout Europe, you find that women's pensions are considerably lower than men's pensions. Women's wages are also lower than men's wages, but not to the same extent as their pensions are, because their pensions depend on a lifetime of accumulated earnings.